What's going on, friends? Welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. Today we are going to be doing a 60-minute turbo brew for a full commander deck. That's right, in 60 minutes we're going to be putting together a full commander deck, and it is going to be a little bit difficult. This is an idea I've had for a while that is not super popular. It's not a common theme like you might find for like elves or some sort of other tribe or easy build around like an Atraxa Praetor's Voice. Today we are going to be playing, or building rather, a more interactive deck. One of the most interactive decks I've ever made, in fact. This is the attempt at a sort of hate bear equivalent deck that I like to call 3-for-1 tribal, which is based on the idea of cards such as Soul Shatter, which actually I already have Scarfo pulled up here. Soul Shatter is sort of the signpost card for what we want to be doing in this deck, where we're not going to be as maximum edict effects as something like Tergrid. However, what we want to be doing is grinding out card advantage against our opponent via playing these edict effects and cards that will net us multiple creatures or non-land permanents off of the board. So if you think about this, Soul Shatter is almost like a reverse Jeska's Will, in that with Jeska's Will, you add a bunch of mana and draw usually 3 cards. If you have your commander on the field, you get both modes. This is like a reverse Jeska's Will in that you remove 3 things off of the board for only 1 card spent. So you effectively draw 2 cards, and you also gain mana by only spending 3 mana and removing potentially more than that off of your opponent's board, usually about 4 or 5. So this is sort of what we want to be doing, and there are other creature type effects that do the same sort of thing. Bronzebeak is a new card out of Lost Caverns that says for each opponent, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls until Bronzebeak Fortress leaves the battlefield. So that's what we're going to want to do, is essentially play these 3-for-1s, even if they're temporary. It helps to make the board more clear, stop our opponents from snowballing, as Magic players are wont to do, and then also build up a board state at the same time. Now, this deck, as I was thinking about how to sort of build this, will follow more of a mid-range pattern, and it will be reliant on winning via combat. And to be honest, we're planning to pack some pretty standard overruns. I have some of the classics in mind, like Critterhoof Behemoth, Moonshaker Cavalry. So we're not going to be super creative on the overrun effects. In fact, there are just some that are good enough that you just want to jam just because they're so generically good. And also what will inform that decision in terms of card choice is the colors that we choose to run, which I'll get into in a little bit. So before we sort of get into the commander discussion, let's actually start off with a bit of an Excel analysis. And what we want to do is sort of plan out what we want to be doing in the game in order to inform what are the sort of slots we want in the deck. Often I find that with commander, it is more about the slot that you draw that informs the development of your game plan more so than the actual card in that slot. So for example, if I were to run Rhystic Study versus Divination, for example, yes, Rhystic Study is like this ultra high power level compared to Divination. However, what really caused me to accelerate in any particular game is the fact that I drew a card that simply draws me cards. So that's why our slot planning is so important. So with our first step here, what we want to do is sort of plan out and rank what is the game plan, which will inform how many cards we want to see throughout the game and even have in our hand. So this little table is sort of what I use as my analysis. In column E is the number of cards we'll have in the deck, and you can see pretty much after we autofill what we're going to have for a commander plus a mana base, we have 61 card slots to play with. And then in column F, we have how many cards will we see in our starting hand, which is 7. And then if we assume that the game will typically go till turn 8 or so, and we'll draw a couple of cards throughout the game, we'll pretty much on average see 20 cards. And so column G is performing that math in order to see how many cards we actually see throughout the game. So here's where we can sort of tinker with these a little bit. So going into this, I have a couple of notes for creatures that I want to include, and the cards that I have jotted down are pretty high CMC, so I think we're going to want a decent amount of ramp, but typically I like to do about 10 to 11 ramp pieces, and I think this will have to push that limit just a little bit more. So I think for ramp slots, we're going to start the discussion at perhaps 13. And then for removal, we will want a pretty solid cast of removal spells. This will sort of be what our core game plan is. Essentially, turns 1 and 2, we want to be ramping. Turns 3 and 4, we want to play some cards that will remove our opponent's stuff. And obviously keeping in mind that we don't want to be playing too much into a board wipe. Then we want to theoretically play, let's say, 2 to 3 creatures between turns 4 and 7, we'll say. And then turn 7 to 9, we want to be playing an overrun effect. So on average, I think we want to see for sure 1 overrun effect throughout the game, maybe even a little bit more. So we'll start this one at, that's actually a little bit too much. I think we'll start this at 8, so that we see about 1.5 throughout the course of a game. Card advantage is going to be sort of built into our game plans, so we don't need crazy amounts of card advantage. When I think about what we're going to be doing is really negating the opponent's what they commit to the board, and so that has sort of built-in card advantage. And part of this deck, I just want to feel really 2 things when I play this deck. I want to feel safe, like I always am able to deal with what's on board, and I want to really feel the value from those 3-for-1s. This deck came about as an idea that I have never really been disappointed to see a Soul Shatter in my hand, and so I sort of just wanted to make a deck of Soul Shatters without going the full like degenerate Turgid route. And so we're going to be playing something a little bit more jank and a little bit more mid-rangey in order for our opponents to be able to interact with our game plan a little bit more and not draw so much hate right away. So our core game plan again is removal. So I think we can just start this off at 20. Typically in an average deck, I'll run about 10 single target removal spells and maybe 1 to 3 board wipes. So I think that this will be a good sort of core game plan. We'll start it out at 10 card advantage pieces, which is sort of average. We can maybe even knock this down to 9. Board wipes, I only think we'll need really 1, which I already sort of have in mind because I think we don't really need as many creature board wipes because we're going to be dealing with creatures so often. And then protection, I like this will have a lot of creatures being committed to the board, and so we want to be able to protect those creatures. Although I will say on average, really the only protection piece I ever run is Teferi's protection, and the reason for that is it is just the best protection piece in the game, and I really, really do not like running defense only type of cards. So I just really always like being able to play off on my back foot and sort of continue to develop the board and slog on rather than only having a card devoted to defense. But I think it's, not bad to have 1. And then, so we have 9 cards remaining, so maybe we can just sort of spread this throughout the categories. We have, let's see, we probably need 1 board wipe. And then what am I missing here? I think we just want to increase our core game plan to just continue to slog this out. And then let's see, so finishers, overruns, board wipes. I think we just want to continue to really just pump that into our removals. 26 will get us to our total cards needed. So if we look at our analysis here, on average, we're going to draw 3 lands, which is exactly what we want to be doing. We'll draw 2 removal pieces, so we'll pretty much have a way to deal with our opponent's stuff always in every starting hand, at least one. Ramp, we're going to have one, which is exactly what we want. We might even need a little bit more so we can maybe play with this number. Card advantage, I think 0.7 is good, and 2 throughout the game is good as well, because we only really need to draw cards maybe 1 or 2 times throughout the course of the game. Again, it really depends also on the meta. If you're facing a lot of board wipes, you'd probably want to increase this number a little bit more. And then we really want 1 overrun effect in the game, and we probably want to ratchet that up just a little bit, because if we have 1 alpha strike that doesn't kill the whole table, we want to be able to draw another. So I think that is a good plan to have about 1.8. 1 board wipe that we can potentially 2 to 4, we'll see, and then 1 protection piece. So that's sort of what I'm thinking going in. And so what we're going to do is actually just start a brand new deck. And I think we're going to call this Police Badge number 3 for 1, because we are going to be playing a 3 for 1 tribal. And then we are going to set it to EDH. Remove your opponent's stuff while building your board, then alpha strike to win the game. Boom. How's that for game plan? This is going to be, we'll just set it to is prototype. And then, so now we sort of get into, let's just populate our categories here. So we want 38 land. We're just going to throw in some forests as a placeholder. We want a placeholder for our commander. So we're going to put that there. And then we're also going to look at our slots, and let me do this really quick so we can get our placeholders in. So we need, we'll call this removal and interaction, and we'll have 26 of, we'll just call this Bronzebeak Foragers. And ramp, we're going to do 14 times, we'll just call this Nature's Lore, because that's just the best ramp piece in the game. Card advantage, we want, we'll call this like a Jessica's Will. Sure, why not? 10x Jessica's Will. And then once we get the categories done, I will start the timer. So then we want a finishers category. We'll just call this Overwhelming Stampede. Finishers 9x Overwhelming Stampede. Board wipes. This one in particular I had in mind. I have always wanted to experiment with running Bane of Progress, so I just want to throw that in the board wipe category, and we can sort of revisit it later. And then protection, I think we'll run Teferi's protection in there. And now we are off to the races. So I do have a couple of notes for what I wanted to, let's make sure save and continue. Oh, I need the commander. Okay, so what I want to do is minimize this, and then we're going to pull up our commander here. So the thought was that this would be a 5-color deck, and just because I want access to pretty much the biggest card pool that I can, given that the strategy is a little bit more jankier or on the fringe. So we sort of make up for that fact by running more colors to increase our selection. So there's a couple of options here. 2 that really caught my eye would be Omnath Locus of All, which is a 4-mana 4/4. If you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead, so you basically save your mana from turn to turn. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top, you may reveal the card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its cost. If you do, add 3 mana in any combination of its colors, put it into your hand. If you don't reveal it, put it into your hand. So it can add mana if you have 3 or more mana symbols, or you just draw a card. So the deck would not meet that criteria for the 3 or more mana symbols, so ultimately this would be a 4-mana commander 4/4, where it would save us mana from turn to turn, which would help us to ramp. theoretically. And then we could also just draw a card for the turn, and technically it wouldn't count as card draw, you know, putting it in your hand, so you wouldn't trigger like the Nekusar type of effects. The other one that really caught my eye, and I'm not sure, but would be the Esika God of the Tree / the Prismatic Bridge. And I already have, if I'm being completely honest, 3 Esika decks. Actually, 2 of them run the Prismatic Bridge as the commander, and the other one is an Esika deck just to run it as a mana dork in the command zone. And this is a 1/4 vigilance, tap to add 1 mana of any color, and then it also gives your legendary creatures vigilance and tap to add 1 mana of any color. So in the deck that I run Esika, I have really appreciated that you always have ramp in the command zone, even if it is not the best rate. The thing is, Esika gives you the best possible card selection by having all 5 colors. And it is just so consistent because usually, even if you have those games where you draw 3 lands but none of your ramp pieces, which is typically just not a good position to find yourself in, Esika is able to come down on turn 3 and still propel you into the 4 and 5 CMCs, which is sort of what you really need to get to. Like, you have to get to that 5 lands. Or 5 mana at your disposal. So I do like Esika. I also like Omnath, and I think for now, I would like to go with Esika in the command zone to add that level of consistency. The other thing too is that for 5 mana commander, she comes down really early, and so we can actually use this as part of our creature count. And in fact, her toughness I think matters as well. I've ran into a couple scenarios where having the 4 toughness actually does make a difference in being able to block profitably, even if she only has 1 power. So what we're going to do is we're going to run Esika, God of the Tree, in the command zone. And we're going to go ahead and continue editing. I think it's Bronzebeak Foragers, plural. So I have a couple of notes for the immediate type of creatures I want to be running. So we're going to switch this to custom categories. So let me actually, let me get this to appear. So we already have our Bronzebeak Foragers, which is pretty much the poster boy for what we want to be doing. What I would like to do is add a few cards here. Balor is... So let me just add these creatures really quick, and then we'll sort of review what they do. Balor and Chaos Defiler both get non-land permanents. Crackling Doom is essentially a Soul Shatter, but for power instead of CMC. Dismantling Wave will get us a 3/4 for artifacts and enchantments. Druid of Purification does the same thing for artifacts and enchantments. Grasp of Fate is like an O-ring effect that hits, I think, all non-land permanents. Highcliff Felidar is like Illuminate Primordial, which will net us creatures, and we can target. A new one for Murders at Karlov Manor is called Krenko's Buzz Crusher, which actually is really cool. It is a 4-mana 4/4 Flying Trample Thopter. When it ETBs, for each player, destroy up to 1 non-basic land that player controls. So it's up to 1, meaning we don't have to target ourselves. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped. So you can get rid of those like Glacial Chasms, Maze of Iths. If they're recurring a Strip Mine over and over, although that wouldn't really work if they're recurring a Strip Mine, but you sort of get the point where it would force an activation at the very least. There is another bomb effect called Make an Example, and this one is honestly on the cut list just because it is not a creature, but outside of that, this is an absolute bomb. Each opponent separates the creatures they control into 2 piles. For each opponent, you choose one of their piles, and they sack the creatures in their chosen pile. So this is does so much work. It always gets you what you want because you're going to be the one that makes the final decision on that. From the Lord of the Rings, we have Aloran's Searing Light, which is the same thing as Crackling Doom, but allows us to, exile the creature instead of poison. instead of having them sack it. Pier's Whim will actually allow us to tutor for a land while our opponents sack an artifact or enchantment. Scion of Calamity is a myriad. Actually, this is a pretty cool creature too. This is one of those where you have to untap with it, but when you do, it is really dangerous. 5/5 Myriad, when it deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. So just absolutely crucial to block that, and it's a 5/5. So always, again, you know, with a Myriad creature, you always want to attack the person who can block it the least profitably so that it survives. Let's see, another all-star that it's kind of a pet card. It's a little overcosted, admittedly, but it's a bit of a pet card, is Shadowgrange Archfiend, which is that same sort of crackling doom effect, but on a body. So when it ETBs, each opponent sacks a creature with greatest power among creatures they control, and you gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures sacked this way. If we happen to run into a discard effect, we can play it for its madness cost, and usually the life doesn't really matter too much because we'll just recoup it. But, you know, for 7 mana, this is a little expensive, but I do still like this card just because it feels like you're really progressing your board while really hindering your opponents. There is the original Shieldred. I guess not the original Shieldred, just the Shieldred. Another one that's potentially on the cutting block, but is interesting in terms of doing kind of what we want to do, is Skull Slither Worm. It's a 4 mana 3/3. When it ETBs, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, put 2 1/1 counters on it. So we don't anticipate us to really get the 1/1 counters often, maybe, you know, 1 in 100 times. But the ETB, each opponent discards a card, is decent, although it's not like an all-star. So that one was interesting, but is also kind of on the chopping block. Soul Shatter, already sort of explained. From Lord of the Rings, we have Balrog of Moria, which is a pretty decent bomb, actually. Let's see, what is it called? It is called the Balrog of Moria. It's an 8/8 with trample and haste, so a nice 8 damage 8 damage that you can use right away in the late game. When it dies, you may exile it. When you do, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. So it still nets us that removal effect, although we're probably not going to have a way to trigger that reliably, but it makes for a great blocker. And it basically says, you know, hey, if you want to destroy this, I'm going to destroy what you have as well. And importantly, very importantly, are these last 2 lines of text, or I guess 3 if you technically count the 2 effects, rather. There are 3 lines of text, 2 effects. You can cycle this, and when you cycle the Balrog, create 2 treasure tokens. So what this actually means is it has an alternative side to it that says 4 mana, store 2 of those mana as treasures, and then you're on top of that paying 2 more mana to then draw a card. So if we don't need this in the late game, or we need to dig for an answer, it is a great option to cycle and generate those treasures. All right, so we have the Balrog of Moria, and another one that is modal is Valki, God of Lies. This one is really cool because there are 2 sides which serve vastly different purposes. It's a 2 mana 2/1 ETBs. Each opponent reveals their hand, and you exile a creature card revealed this way until Valki leaves. So it's temporary. However, the effect is much better than just a straight discard. And then you can have it become a copy of one of those creatures. So if it is like a value piece or something that draws cards, that's great. But what is also important is that if it is in the late game and we just need to generate a bunch of card advantage, we cast this for 7 mana to then exile the top card of each player's library, and we can play those with this static ability. Also, we can exile something if we want to. Let's see, exile all cards. And what's the ultimate, which will pretty much never... That's awful. That's an awful ultimate. We will never activate that, not even 1 in 100 times. Okay. And finally, there is a card called Visions of Ruin, which is essentially kind of a 1 mana edict effect for artifacts, because for each artifact that the opponent sacks, you create a treasure token, and then we can flash it back, which I don't know exactly how Isika would be treated with this flashback, but I can find that out later. All right, so that concludes our removal category. Then I think we want to move on to a ramp category. Now, I was really thinking about how to build a a set of ramp cards in a deck where we really want to be on board for an overrun effect, specifically Overwhelming Stampede. There's a couple of ways we can go about this. We can ramp with artifacts and enchantments, which is decent, except that we're in green, so we really have the access to the best ramp cards that Commander has. So most people go for the land ramp spells, which is a little bit more safe. But I think we almost want to split our land ramp spells and our mana dork spells because we want to be on board. We are a little bit more susceptible to a board wipe. We're actually, I mean, we are very susceptible to a board wipe. But the offset is that if there is not a board wipe, then we have a lot more damage on board for when that Alpha Strike eventually comes down. And in addition to that, I think that in a grindier game, it will just be better to be a little bit more on board, to give ourselves more blockers as well, to sort of stop the super fast aggro decks. So for that reason, I think I have a couple of mana dorks in mind. Birds of Paradise is just a classic green staple. There's also the Llanowar Elves types of cards. The thing is about those is we don't really need the green so much. Llanowar Elves, we don't really need to pay a green to net us a green that's essentially colorless. So, you know, maybe we want some of the more color enablers like Ignoble Hierarch and Noble Hierarch, which will net us Ignoble Hierarch. I think this one is Jund, and then Noble Hierarch is, I think, Bant, which I actually wish that this cycle would be finished, but it can net us Bant. And then if we want to run, let's maybe do like an Avassin's Pilgrim for the white. Another all-star is Black Market Connections because it generates treasures and allows us to draw cards, and it costs 3, and there's 3 modes on it. So that's a set. That's just an absolute reason on its own to run this card. There's also classics like Nature's Lore, Farseek, 3 Visits. I think there's one of the new cards, Open the Way, is good. It essentially acts as like a 4-mana ramp that fixes you for colors. There's Sky Shroud Claim. There's also Ranger's Path, but that automatically enters tapped. There's also, if we're really creature heavy, one that I do like is Somberwald Sage. So this is a 3-mana investment where we get 3 mana back. The downside, it is a 0/1, so it is weak sauce for body. But we will put it in, and then what else do we have there? Oh, so we have black at our disposal, and one of my favorites that's actually my demon deck is Heartless Summoning, which gives us a discount on creatures for 2 colorless, which is actually great. As soon as you cast 2 spells, creature spells, then this is already paid for itself, and this -1/-1 doesn't matter too much. We probably won't have a lot of 1/1s on board. I guess, yeah, the only thing about that, though, is we're going to be running mana dorks. So maybe we actually replace Heartless Summoning with... Maybe we replace that with a Ranger's Path. We'll put it in the maybe board, because actually I didn't even realize at the time. All right, so let's go Heartless Summoning in the maybe board. All right, so we'll save and continue editing there. So to bank all of our changes. And then what I'm going to do is continue our ramp category. So let's see, how many do we actually have? Let's go back to, oh, we got to get rid of our Nature's Lore. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so there's 11. You know, we could pack more mana dorks like Delighted Halfling. There's also Ornithopter of Paradise, which has the benefit of being a flyer. Delighted Halfling, though, Depends on how many legendary creatures we run. So let's put it in and we can sort of reconsider that later for how many legends we have. And then from there, I think there's also one card that came to mind is, this isn't really, so because we're just limited a little bit on card draw, I just want to put in as many sort of overlapping effects as we can. So Master of Ceremonies, granted it doesn't do anything on the turn it comes down, but at the beginning of our upkeep, essentially each opponent chooses to create a treasure, draw a card, or a 1/1 citizen, and for each player that chose that, we also do that. So this one can actually net us mana, draw cards, and expand our board for 4 mana. So granted we're giving out things to our opponents, and we might even need to keep in mind the fact that we are giving our opponents tokens while packing edict effects. But a lot of the edict effects that I already added, I think more target CMC and power are targeted, so we can sort of bypass the fact that they might use the tokens. What would really be more concerning is that they would use the tokens to block, because well, and that would also depend on what sort of overruns we run, if assuming that we can generate the necessary evasion. So if we add Master of Ceremonies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 ramp pieces. Okay, that sounds good. So let's go with that. And then maybe for our 14th, we'll just throw in an Ornithopter of Paradise. You know, there's another one actually, Ornithopter. It's called, I think it's called Beast Collar Savant, which is not flying. However, it does have haste, and allows us to Beast Collar. Oh, it's is it Beast Collar Savant? Yeah, okay, 2 mana haste. We can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Again, color fixing very important in this deck. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell. So let's add that. So there's our 14 ramp pieces. Oh, we need to get rid of Bronze Beak. I think I have. There we go. All right, so these are our 2 sort of core categories. And then also I wanted to let's delve into our finishers, because I think our card advantage is sort of dependent on everything else that we run in terms of how I want to build around the synergies. So we'll set this to 1. And so for Jessica's Will, we already have that added, which is both mana advantage and card advantage. So again, just this great access to card pool is allowing us to sort of overlap as many categories as we can. There is a couple of, so we really want to be on board, and there's a couple of these that come to mind. Asper Sentinel, and I think we can actually, let's see, what else is on board? There is a couple of options. So there's a couple of options that are card advantage, but they don't necessarily just draw us cards. One of my favorites, actually, one of my absolute favorites, is Sylvanas Stampede, which is Sylvanas Stampede, which is mana advantage and card advantage stapled into the same thing. So starting with you, each player votes for wild or free. Essentially, you dig from your deck until you hit a creature card for each wild vote and then put those cards on the battlefield. Or most opponents will vote for free, which says you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for free. So we can ramp if we, as a last resort, have land, but mostly this is just going to net us a ton of mana advantage. For example, if we have something like an Atali in our hand, which is actually a good call out. I think we should run Atali, both Atalis, because they are sort of that theme of 3-for-1s, always netting us more card advantage for the one we spend. So that would be Atali Primal Conqueror and Atali Primal Storm. Atali Primal Conqueror also serving as a backup win win con because we can essentially transform it into a Blightsteel Colossus. Another 3-for-1 card is called, what is it called? Seize the Spotlight. This one is not as powerful because our opponents will always choose the mode that benefits them benefits us the least. Each opponent chooses Fame or Fortune. For each player chose Fame, gain control of a creature that player controls until end of turn, and they gain haste and untap. For each player who chose Fortune, you draw a card and create a treasure token. I've seen this card in YouTube, so I haven't played a ton with this card, but when I've seen it in like YouTube gameplays, they tend to draw, there's at least one player who will give you a card and a token. So even if this is 2 threaten effects that cantrips for only 2 mana, that's an insane amount of value still. Then we have one of my favorite, actually, this card was also in mind when I was initially thinking of cards to build the deck around. Siphon Mind is just an absolute all-star in black because it allows us to draw 3 cards and our opponents discard 1 card. So just a ton of card advantage overall. Then there is a couple of other cards that I am a big fan of. One is called Plarg and Nasari, which is from March of the Machine Aftermath. I think I spelled that right. N-A-N-S-S. So it's a 5-mana 5/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top until they exile a non-land card. So you get 4 cards exiled. An opponent chooses a non-land card this way. And what's not written is that that card is no longer eligible for you to choose. So you have 3 cards left, fitting our 3-for-1 theme. And then you may cast up to 2 spells from among the other cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So this will, typically your opponents will exile the card that you come up with so that you don't have these sort of synergy pieces to enable your game plan. But even then, even if we still hit a ramp card or maybe a card draw spell or literally any creature, we are always doing what we want to be doing, which is either removing our opponent's stuff, building our board, or advancing our mana and card advantage. So Plarg and Nasari is awesome and costs 5. It's a little expensive, but it will allow us to cast more spells. There's another couple of cards. So if we're going to be destroying so many creatures, and this will really depend on the number of exile and versus destroy effects, Morbid Opportunist is another option there. Whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. To be honest, even this is good pretty much just generically because creatures just die in Magic, blockers, removal, etc. And so I have almost never been disappointed with a Morbid Opportunist, even when my deck is not particularly synergizing with it. Another one that comes to mind, so when I was sort of thinking of how we can best fill out this category, I wanted to pack as many creature-based spells as I possibly could, just because I think because we're running so few overrun effects, we really want to be utilizing every creature we can, or rather having as wide of a board state as we can. Excuse me. And so one card that came to mind is called Generous Patron, which is essentially a 3-mana draw 2, where you put 2/1/1 counters on your opponent's creatures. And then another one that came to mind is, I think it's called Fellstinger. This is another one. It's a 3/2 with Death Touch and Exploit, and when it exploits a creature, target player draws 2 and loses 2. So I'm a little bit hesitant, though, on Fellstinger because it's sort of going against our game plan. We don't really have disposable creatures to sack. I mean, we don't want to be sacking a Mana Dork. We don't have a lot of low-to-the-ground creatures that don't provide us value in the late game. So this one I like, and so I'll throw it in the maybe board. But I think we're not going to add this to the main board for now. And let's see, another one is the what is the card? It's the white card with Alliance. What is the white card with Alliance? Rumor Gatherer. 3-mana 2/1. Whenever another creature ETBs under your control, scry 1. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, draw a card, and then after that you continue to scry 1. Problem with this is our curve is a little bit on the higher end, and so we can't reliably trigger the draw a card clause. So I like this one, but I think it will go in the maybe board. And then I think another one, let's see, it's called Braids. Braids Arisen Nightmare. So this is a 3/3 for 3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sack an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sack a permanent that shares a type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 and you draw a card. So this is one where I actually think it might be worth it to run a sack effect, because even if we were to sack a mana dork, if we think about it, I've actually played with this card a decent amount, and I've seen a decent amount of it on YouTube, and typically this will draw you about 2 cards per turn, between 1 and 2, and if we were to say, okay, this essentially says sacrifice a mana dork, draw 2 cards, then I would be in for it. If you add on the fact that we can, if we really need our creatures, and maybe we're a little bit, heavy on the lands, we can start sacking lands to then draw those cards. So I do like Braids because she just provides more value than the Felstinger. And more importantly than that really is more flexibility, because Felstinger forces you to do that sack effect on a creature. Braid says we can maybe spread it out to a land, or maybe if we have an enchantment, something like the Black Market Connections is dealing us too much damage, even that can help mitigate that life loss. All right, so let's save that. So finally we have our finishers category, and there's a couple actually. Let's go with the finishers category. So we have 9 finishers to work with here, and so we've got our Overwhelming Stampede. And then we'll add some generic finishers. These are not particularly interesting, but they are just reliable game finishers. Curta Hoof and Moonshaker Cavalry effectively have the same effect. And then we've got, Commander Staple Chroma's Will. And there is also, let's see, do we want to just run generic Overrun? I feel like there's always better card. Oh, one card that actually comes to mind is, for a 5-color deck, Tromp the Domains is actually pretty incredible. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +1/+1 for each basic land type among lands you control. So this, if we have even 4 basic land types, a 6 mana +4/+4 and trample, which is about on rate than with generic Overrun. Generic Overrun is 5 mana, creatures you control at +3/+3. So if we add 1 more mana for the +4/+4, and where it really shines is the 6 mana for +5/+5. So I think we add in this. I think Tromp makes for a great finisher, and it's very cheap. There's also some creature-based overruns like Earthshaker Giant. That will give our creatures +3/+3. And also good as a follow-up hitter because it has a 6/6. There's also Endray's Forerunners, which I think is a classic. And then sort of in that category of cards pulling double duty, with all of these creatures, if we were to just take a look here at the creatures that we have, let me go to creature type. Let's see. So 2/2, 1/1/3/3, 5/4, 5/5. So the average power, let's see, Atali 5/5/0/1/4/4, 5/5/8/4. So I feel like our average power is about between 3 and 4. So I think that's worth running Return of the Wildspeaker. This can serve as both card advantage and a finisher, because we can't. So if we assume that, so we don't have many humans, that's typically kind of the first thing you want to check if this is cards worth running, and we don't have a lot of humans. And if we assume even that we're going to be drawing 3 cards as like the sort of average case, a 5-minute instant draw 3 is not terrible, but more importantly, it pulls double duty, so it's just always useful because we can give our non-human creatures +3/+3 until end of turn. So I want to see, let's run that, which we can take a look at later if we need to lower the curve. And then another one that sort of fits our, not necessarily a 3-for-1, but when I think of finishers, how do we, like finishers that you can play while you're both ahead and behind? The Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite comes to mind, where we give our other creatures +2/+2 and creatures your opponents control -2/-2 as just a static effect. So this is great. I mean, so if we sort of think about what the deck is good at, right, in terms of the matchups, this will be great. This deck is great against fatty type of decks that are really heavy on board, your Hensies, your Goreclaw type of decks, your Xenagos type of decks. We can easily deal with fatties. What we struggle with are the token go wide and aristocrat type of strategies that are also very sort of very creature wide. So this helps mitigate those matchups a little bit. And honestly, I have never, granted Elesh Norn tends to not survive, so I like to use this more, consider this as more of like an alpha strike that does more, because it will essentially give our creatures +4/+4 due to the differential. So I don't assume that this will ever survive for more than a turn because it is very oppressive. However, even if it hits the field, it basically says, look, you need a counterspell, otherwise this is going to hit the field, and as a state-based action, your stuff is going to get removed. So for that reason, we run it. Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. All right, so we've got 26 minutes left. I think we're doing good. And then another cycle that came to mind is the Primordial cycle. So if you guys don't know, well, actually, these are pretty old, so I think a lot of Commander players kind of know about these already. Sepulchral Primordial, all of these have sort of a 3-for-1 effect that do different things based on the color that they have. So the black one reanimates creatures. The white one, I think, exiles things in a Swords to Plowshare effect. Exile up to 1 target creature, and that player gains life equal to its power. So we're going to run the Primordial cycles, which actually, I think we're just going to call it its own category. Sepulchral Primordial, Illuminate Primordial. There is Diluvium Primordial and Molten Primordial, and the green Primordial I think is banned, unfortunately. So I'm not going to add the blue one. Here's why. So far, I am just not a fan of 5-color decks. If I'm being completely honest, it is for lazy reasons. It is because I just do not like the play pattern of searching for, aiming to get all your colors. Like every turn you are worried about what colors you have. And so I think by sort of mitigating the colors that we're running, we can help color fix more. And also we don't have to worry about nabbing blue. The reason that I sort of mentioned this is in my notes, I was putting together sort of a compilation of the creatures and stuff that were that have these sort of 3-for-1 effects that, something like a Bronzebeak Forager has. And there's just not as many. Blue is the least built out in this category. There are cards like, what is it called? Larcenist. It's called Kitesail Larcenist that makes artifacts or creatures into treasures. This is a great one. I would really like to run this, and honestly, I might consider it if I do need to. Let's actually add it to the maybe board. If we need to add some blue or run some blue. So we're going to go Kite Sail Larcenist. There's also a card that I have a pauper deck built around called Lagrella the Magpie. When she ETBs, exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players. Basically means just up to one creature per player. And then she rewards you for essentially flickering the card for creatures you control. So this one is another sort of temporary effect. Although she is very pip intensive. So if we were to run like a Omnath for our commander, then we would consider that. No nonsense, because we're going to be policing the board. Okay, so that lands us in our primordial category. Do I have Bane of Progress in here? Bane of Progress, okay. And then let's see, let's look at, there's a couple of Goad cards that I like. There's a new one from the Murders at Karlov Manor called, oops, I have Murders at Karlov Manor on the mind, Havoc Eater, which is a little expensive for its effect, but God, look at that art. That is so cool. And if we look at what its effect is, 3/3 flyer when ATBs for each opponent, goad up to one target creature that opponent controls. Put X 1/1 counters on Havoc Eater, where X is the total power of creatures goaded this way. So again, if we're going up against those fatty decks, even if we assume the average cases we goad a 4/4 or 3/3, if we goad 3 3/3s, that makes this a 12/12 with flying. That's just insane. That's just so insane. I mean, it's 7 mana, so like you would hope to be ending the game for 7 mana, and you have to untap with it. But I like these types of cards because they allow our opponents to actually interact with us. Unlike the Turgid hyper fast edict effect, we want to be able to offer up the chance to sort of interact. I feel like that's more rewarding both, like when we're building a deck, it's more rewarding to sort of build in weaknesses into our deck, which makes our deck more interesting overall. So we're going to make a category that's just called Goad. Speaking of Goad, another all-star, as long as we're in the colors, that I've never seen not do just a ton of work is called Taunt from the Rampart. Goad all creatures your opponents control. Most importantly, until your next turn, those creatures can't block. So just another great finisher, because we can essentially play this on the turn we want to swing in. We swing in, we don't have to worry about the crackback, and we can guarantee that our opponents are going to be swinging for a ton of damage. And to be honest, this really would suck to be the person to your right, because you just are the last one to play blockers. So, and then let's see, let's go to one more Goad card called Suntaran General. This is a new one from Doctor Who, which looks absolutely bizarre, but it's a 5/5 for 5 with trample and haste, already good stats for the cost. When it and at least 2 other creatures attack, 3 creatures, hitting our 3-for-1 theme. For each opponent, goad up to one target creature that player controls. Those creatures can't block. So you can also neutralize your opponent's most potent or profitable blocker, while also having the option to sort of make sure that they get in for a ton of damage. All right, Suntaran General. All right, so let's go save that. So I think we're over by a couple of cards. We're at 102. So we need to cut a couple of cards here. And I think what I want to do is examine. So first, let's throw this into Moxfield. We have 20 minutes still, so I think we have the time to run a custom analysis from Moxfield. So let's do, oops, I need this to see our new, here we go, Moxfield. We are going to make a new deck. It's going to be private, so we can monkey with the mana curve and not have people judge us. And then what we're going to do is just take a look at our curve here. So first we have to custom adjust the mana costs. So this is where if I were to run like MDFC lands, I would take them out so that they don't influence the curve. Shadowgrange, Archfiend, Bane of Progress, Shaker, Itali. These are all 6 costs. Baylor, Case Defiler. These are all 5 costs. We're going to Stampede. Okay, that's fine. And like again, if I were to run something like an Eagles of the North, for example, as like my land slot, I would remove this from the deck entirely. So let me show you. Actually, I mean, the more popular example for these types of cards is Lorien Revealed, which is a 5 mana draw 3, and we can island cycle it for 1. So it's essentially a tapped MDFC land that's also useful in the late game if you don't need the mana. All right, let's see. The Balrog I have at a 4 CMC, which I think is a little bit cheesy, but we're also giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt where if we need to cast it as an emergency, we can cast it as a 4 CMC. So I think that's fine. Open the Way I have as a 4 CMC because at 4, it's going to be the same rate as Skyshroud Claim. We have Ranger's Path, Skyshroud Claim, Siphon Mine, Visions of Ruin, which is really kind of a 1-drop because theoretically, but it's not always going to refund us the 3 treasures. We're just going to pretty much assume that everybody will run treasures. This one is a little weak. I'm uncertain about Visions of Ruin, if I'm being completely honest. I'd rather almost run like a Lauren of the Third Path, I think, because that's a little bit more targeted, but also I'd like to find something that's more on theme, like a Lagrella or like one of the Kitesail Larcenists. And then we have 2 4-drops there, Braids. Oh, Moxfield does this weird thing where one of these is like the optional commander, and for some reason I can't change the mana cost. So that's unfortunate. Let's see. These are all 3-drops. Just because Seize the Spotlight, Crackling Doom, Black Market Connections, Grasp of Fate. Grasp of Fate. And then we've got a Beast Color Savant, Valky, Farseek 3 Visits. Let's see. These are all 1-drops. And then Pick Your Poison. I don't know if Moxfield just doesn't recognize the new one, but the Pick Your Poison is actually from Murders at Call of Manor, which again is not out quite yet. Choose one, each opponent sacks an artifact, or they sack an enchantment, or they sack a creature with flying. Okay, so we're at 102 cards. And what does our curve look like? So this is what our colors look like. So we're at 4.2, which is very heavy. 41% green. Black is our least popular symbol. 22% white, 25% red. So we want green and red primarily. I mean, these are pretty close, but ultimately black is our least popular color. And then I think what we want to do is actually cut some of the top end because 4.2 is pretty crazy. I mean, the thing is we have 38 lands and 14 ramps. So like if we were to do, what's their back of the napkin calc on that? So 32 plus 14 divided by 99 times over the course of a game. So here's what I like to sort of think of when I do this calc is over the course of the game, we will generate 10.5 mana. So if we assume that every piece of ramp generates us 1 mana, we will encounter 10.5 mana sources. So if we round down to 10, so ultimately we'll get to 10 mana by turn 8 or so. So that's, I think, plenty. The question is, we won't start double spelling with a 4 CMC curve until turn 6. And are we okay with that? I think first of all, we need to get down to the 4 CMC curve because we're at 4.2, which is really heavy. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of, I think Endraze is our weakest overrun effect. Although I do really like the fact that it gives creatures vigilance. Well, let me think about that. So Endraze Forerunners versus Elish Norn. I guess Endraze Forerunners is 1 more mana. Elish Norn is really oppressive. So Elish Norn allows us to attack more profitably because it has a bigger differential. Or allows our creatures to have power and toughness with a bigger differential. However, Endrace Forerunners has the hasty body with it, so it actually sends more damage. I think I do prefer the Elish Norn. The reason why is we really need to negate the token decks, given that they are sort of our weakness, especially that the fact that we're not running any graveyard hate, to be honest. We're being pretty irresponsible gamers. But, you know, sometimes you have to worry about the core and then, you know, build in the support later. Let's see. Of our 7-drops, I think our weakest 7-drop is either Molten Primordial or Shadowgrange Archfiend. One card that also comes to mind for our maybe board is Compost. This is a really old card that actually can draw a pretty ridiculous amount of cards. Whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard, you may draw a card. So basically, you know, if there is a black deck at the table, often black decks are sacking creatures, they're playing spells, because this, again, any black card, so instants and sorceries trigger this as well. So Compost is an option, I think, to keep in mind, given that we're going to be triggering so many sack effects. How many card advantage do we have, actually? Is this worth... We have 11 card advantage. I mean, that's pretty healthy. That is pretty healthy. If anything... Illuminate... Okay. So let's go back to our 7-drops. So... Elish Norn is an overrun. I don't want to cut an overrun. Atali Primal Conqueror is just a great card overall. I'm never disappointed to see this card, and this card will always propel you forward. Oh, I can't stand the coin. We're going to go that one. Okay, Atali Primal Conqueror. There we go. There's our boy. Havoc Eater. Again, this is what we want to be doing to sort of close out the game. We're going to goad some creatures, generate a huge flyer. High Cliff Faladar is essentially the same thing as Illuminate Primordial. Neither of them actually target which the greatest power among creatures. Oh, wait, hold on. They're not the same. Okay. So in this ETB, for each opponent, choose a creature with the greatest power among creatures. Oh, so it forces the creature power and it destroys. And then Illuminate exiles, but you choose and they gain the life. So both of them honestly have good bodies and they both have vigilance. So those are pretty much identical. I think that fits the bill for what we want to be doing. These are like perfect 3-for-1s. Molten Primordial, the reason why I'm considering cutting it is because it does not get rid of any threats. It does allow us to capitalize on what our opponents have on board. And, you know, another card that comes to mind that sort of does the same effect is Insurrection. However, I really have been kind of cutting Insurrection from decks because it just kind of wins the game out of nowhere. And, I mean, I have always loved seeing it in action, but it is pretty much a feel bad for your opponents because all this card, like, you don't have to jump through any hoops. It just says you win the game if you draw this card. So that's like a little bit anticlimactic, I think, and it leads to this giant math equation. So anyway, the reason why Molten Primordial is on the chopping block is because theoretically, once we get to the point at which we can cast a 7-drop means that we probably have gotten rid of most of their threats. So like what's on board is actually still probably pretty weak. And it's a 6/4 body, so it doesn't really stick around if we're attacking with it. I mean, it's a decent body, but for 7 mana. And then Sepulchral is just going to be an army in a can, which is fun. Shadowgrange Archfiend. Each opponent sacks a creature. Let's cut Molten Primordial. I think we'll go with that because that actually, I really do love the effect of, you know, take the scariest thing and throw it in your opponent's face. But it past that one attack, it just doesn't do a lot. You know, another card that comes to mind now that I think about it is Breach the Multiverse. This sort of fits the bill for what we want to be doing. We're really heavy in the high CMC category, though. Each player mills 10. For each player, choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. Put those cards on the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So this is always going to be, this is actually a 4-for-1. This is like better than a 3-for-1. So maybe it's like too good for our deck, but we're going to add it to the maybe board. I love Breach. I've never cast a Breach and been sad from it. Okay, so that puts us at 100 cards, and now we're at 4.11 CMC. So let's see with our last few minutes here if we can sort of modify. Okay, so let's look at our categories first. Then we'll take a look at the curve. So our ramp category, let's see, Beast Collar Savant. Oh, wait, how many types do we have? 36 creatures, so Beast Collar Savant can trigger on 36% of our, wait, am I doing this wrong? Of our spells, so 36 divided by 61. So 60% of our spells can be cast with the Beast Collar Savant. I'm not sure. I mean, it's hasty, so you can use it if the turn comes down, so that's pretty sick. 17 sorceries, which is mostly our card advantage and ramp, and then 6 instants. So no artifacts, which is good, I think, and no enchantments. So I think our Bane of Progress is looking spicy as ever with these card types. Birds is a great Black Market Connections, a double dip in card advantage and ramp. Always excited to see that. Delighted Halfling. Let's look at how many legendaries we have for Delighted Halfling. So we have our commander, first of all. So that's 1. So Braids. Oh, this is an artifact. Interesting. Okay, so then we have Elshnorn. That's 3. Italia, that's 4. Italia, that's 5. Eliminate. Plarg is 6. Shieldred is 7. Balrog is 8. Valky is 9. Okay, so it can trigger on 9 things. Let's bring up our calculator again. So 9 divided by our total spells on the deck is 60. Well, actually, we got to say 62 because we're including our commander in that count. So it only triggers on 4, so we can cast 15% of our spells, which is pretty bad. So here's the deal with this particular deck. Because we want to be casting Esika on turn 2, we want to be playing a Mana Dork on turn 1. So what other 1-mana Dorks do we have? We have the Elves. We have... Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell. Oh, man. I mean, do we run it just for the colorless? Like, it only can cast 15%. There's always the option of like a rampant growth, I suppose, but we really want those 1 mana. You know what also comes to mind is like the wild growth type of effects. Whatever it's like. You know what actually I want to do? I think we might replace this with the Utopia Sprawl. Although we do want the creature body. We want the body. So we'll add these to the maybe board, but I think we really just do want wild growth and Utopia Sprawl. All right. And then, let's see, so Farseek will fix us for colors, which is why we're running it. And we total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 creatures out of our ramp. So we have roughly a 50-50 split between land ramp and creature-based ramp. Master of Ceremonies is a little expensive for what it does. I mean, this could be an elf, to be honest, like a Llanowar Elves. There's also Deathrite Shaman. So if we have... Actually, maybe we run a Deathrite Shaman. Maybe we run... I have, believe it or not, never ran a Deathrite Shaman in a deck. Exile target. Oh, it has to be a land card. Man. And it is incidental graveyard hate. So here's the deal. Master of Ceremonies is playing double duty by potentially drawing cards, although we don't want to be giving away tokens. We do want to lower the curve. So I honestly think we might trade in the Master of Ceremonies for a Deathrite Shaman. Or do we swap out the Delighted Halfling? We have 3 minutes, so we got to make this decision quick. Let's see, Master of Ceremonies. I think we trade in the Master of Ceremonies for a Deathrite Shaman. I think we do, because we're going to be running a decent amount of fetches. Deathrite Shaman. All right. And that lowers our curve. Okay, so that's contemplation of our ramp category. The rest of these are land ramp. Ranger's Path is going to allow us to fix our colors by getting forests. Skyshroud Claim again. Summerald Sage is a 3 mana investment. And then 3 visits can mana fix us. Okay, so then let's check our sort of core cards here. Baylor is going to... So let's do it this way. I want to track artifacts and creatures. So this is artifacts... Creatures, Chaos Defiler, non-land permanents, so that's 2 each, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5, 4, 5, 5, non-basics, we'll skip that. 5, 6, 5, 7, 6, 7, 7, 7, 8, 7, 8, 8, 8, 9. Discard will skip. 8, 10. 8, 11. We'll skip that one. And so that's 9, 11. So 9 artifact enchantment removers and 11 creature removers. I think that's pretty good. Considering, yeah, I mean, creatures are the main thing we would be worried about. Visions of Ruin is a little bit... I'd really like to replace this with like Lagrella, but then we start running blue. Man, that's a tough call. That is a tough call. I think I might potentially... Let's see. Oh, and then one thing. Okay, so with our last minute, let's just evaluate really quick where our cost is at. Oops. So we're going to pull up. So this is currently at about $420. Nice. And we're going to add in the lands, which I actually just have kind of a copy and paste here. So let's see. Once we add those, I think it's going to go up significantly. Yeah, we're up to like $2,000. So I do have OG duels in this land list. So if you want to remove sort of the expensive lands, you can definitely build a 5-color mana base rather on the cheap. However, you're always going to be entering tapped, and a lot of these enter untapped. So let me see then with our last 10 seconds. I think that is a decent deck. Let's see, we're at 100 cards. We've got Teferi's Protection. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Our hour's up. So this is looking like the deck. Let's just do one more scan. One thing that is kind of crazy. So is our curve still. And we have a lot of 7 drops and a decent amount of 6 drops. You know, I'd maybe even consider cutting the Bane of Progress, but I think this is just really good for this particular type of deck where we can take advantage of not having many artifacts and enchantments. And then there's also the new Galta, actually, that comes to mind as like a potential maybe. Galta. which I don't remember. I think it's Stampede Tyrant. So when ETB is putting a number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Just an insane card with like a tribute to the World Tree on the field, because you refund all of the creatures back. So we're going to finish off. We have 8 finishers. We have a Teferi's Pro, 2 Primordials, a little bit of Goad to accelerate, a whole lot of removal. Pick your poison. Pick your poison. This one is one that might not be worth the card. Oh, you know what? Another one that's, as long as I just can't stop brewing, even though we're past time. But we're adding to the maybe board. This is not the main board, but Windgrace's Judgment comes to mind as being a card. That's like just a 5 mana instant speed. For each opponent, destroy 1 non-land permanent they control. Any number of opponents destroy a token on that permanent that player controls. So we have, again, a pretty heavy curve. However, we have, I think, enough ramp in the deck. And let's see. So the way that I sort of like to also evaluate decks is by sort of slowly going from left to right on the curve, just to see like how does our early game progress into our late game. So early on, you'll see that all of our creatures either ramp us or draw cards, and the vast majority do actually just ramp us. Esper Sentinel's great to have early. It will draw you a ton of cards. But we're really going to be starting out with some ramp at 1 mana. At 2 mana, we're either going to be casting more ramp. Why do I not have a Nature's Lore in here? Ramp, Nature's Lore. I don't have Nature's Lore. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is cause for ponder. I think what we do we cut a Mana Dork for Nature's Lore? Or we could cut Ranger's Path to lower the curve a little bit. I think that's what we do. I think we substitute. So we gotta go Ranger's Path, and in its place we're gonna put in Nature's Lore because that enters untapped. If you can get like a Shockland or something. Ranger's Path, and then we'll go Nature's Lore. All right, what is our curve looking like now? 4.03. We're basically on 4 even. So let's go back to our exercise here. So then in 2 mana, we have more ramp, and then a Valky, which I guess we can sort of temporarily delay our opponent's game plan. Again, Tybalt is sort of our last resort. We can always draw effectively 4 cards for 7 mana. Okay, so then on 3 CMC, we're pretty much going to be casting our commander to ramp again. So like a pretty heavy ramp theme. And as as Richard from MTG Goldfish says, pretty much the most powerful thing you can be doing in commander is to ramp. So I think that's perfect for what we want to be doing. So when we're not casting a Sika, we can either draw cards. Pretty much all of these either ramp or draws cards. Again, I think just great to have that resource generation on the lower CMC. Jessica's and C's in that same category. And then we have a couple of removal spells. So it's pretty much either ramp, draw cards, or removal. Dismantling Wave, Crackling Doom, and Grasp of Fate will all remove things, but we're mostly still gathering resources. It is in the 4 CMC where we start to see our game plan actually sort of distinguish itself. Bronzebeak, Foragers, Druid, Krenkos, these are all removal effects. Technically, Balrog is an 8 mana, but you know we can always consider this resource generation. Make an example, Open the Way, Pier's Whim. So we've got more ramp and card draw and a little bit of removal and a finisher. So most of these are really removal. Then more removal. Pretty much these are all removal, and we see a couple of our overrun effects start to appear. We have the Chroma's Will in the 4 CMC, and then Overwhelming Stampede in the 5. Taunt from the Rampart, similar sort of effect where we can get in for damage. And then we've got, let's see, more card advantage and overruns. And then, let's see, we'll consider Elishnorn an overrun. Etali, card advantage, removal. You know what I would like to add, though, is a Breach the Multiverse. Because Breach is just so good, man. So good. What's like, What do we cut, though? Because Breach is 7 CMC. I swear, this will be the last consideration. Because we're going past our 60-minute mark. So it's 7 CMC and it's black. So it's either cut a 7 drop or an 8 drop. So we need our 8 drops because they're our best overruns and our best closers. So I think then we go down to our 7 drops. So I'm kind of leaning on the Luminate Primordial because although we're cutting some of our theme here, but Elishnorn would be kind of the second card that I would go to, because it has the least amount of potential to win us the game, but I'm really hesitant though because that -2/-2, like I've been saying, we really need that to counter sort of the decks that we're weak against. Choose a creature with the greatest power, destroy those creatures. So if we consider Crackling Doom at 3 mana, and this costs 7, we're paying 4 mana for a 5/5 Vigilance body, which when you reframe it that way is not amazing. And it does not get around indestructible. So it gets around hexproof, but it does not get around indestructible. Illuminate Primordial is targeted, which is just way better, I think. So honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards cutting the Highcliff Felidar for a Breach the Multiverse because, well, think about it this way. What's the value? So if Highcliff Felidar effectively gives us the 5/5 body plus gets rid of 3 other bodies, it's generating the equivalent of 4 creature bodies by removing 3 and giving us 1. Breach will give us 4. And I think though the 4, so Breach is more offensive because it actually generates the creatures, but also you have the potential to put onto the field bigger and more scarier creatures, especially when we've been destroying creatures all game and filling the graveyard. Exile up to 1. The fact that it targets is so good, but I am so reluctant to cut the Highcliff because there's just a lot of value. But when you frame it as Crackling Doom plus 4 mana for a 5/5 Vigilance, that's not great. Havoc Eater can win us the game. See, like in the 7 CMC, they can like win us the game. What about Shadowgrange? Each opponent sacks with the greatest power among creatures they control. You gain life equal to life lost this way. Yeah, I think in this category, this is one of those that we're going to have to kind of cut a card that is near and dear to our hearts. All right. There, we have our final ad. We're cutting Highcliff Felidar and putting in... and so here's where I'm actually going to just rearrange some of the categories. So then we're just going to call this Reanimate, because we're going to put Sepulchral and Breach into there. And then I think we'll put Luminate into the removal category, so we actually have like an accurate count for what we're doing. So I think that's the deck. I think that is honestly the deck. We are ending up with a 4.03 mana curve, which is very heavy, but we have a lot of support for that. We have at least 12 card advantage because we have this plus the black market connections sitting in the ramp category. We have 14 ramp pieces plus our commander plus Jessica's Will. So that's effectively 16 ramp pieces. We're going to see a ton of ramp pieces throughout the game. Times 23 ramp pieces there. And then, you know, we're going to finish out the game with some strong overrun effects and goad effects. And if we don't draw our finishers for the overruns, we have finishers in the form of just army generation via Breach of the Multiverse and Sepulchral Primordial. And we are going to end up with 35 creatures, 18 sorceries, 6 instants, and 2 enchantments. So that looks really good. Now, the question is, the final question we want to address is, what is our featured card? Ladies and gentlemen, what is our featured card? I think we started off this video by saying that Bronzebeak Foragers was the signpost card for this deck. So I think it serves as the honorary spot for our featured card slot. We're gonna give props where they are due as the original inspiration for this deck. So that is deck my 3-for-1 tribal deck, police badge number 341, no nonsense allowed. And I think we can see with this deck that it is not as oppressive as something like a Turgid. It allows opponents to fight back. The deck is vulnerable to board wipe, so a board wipe will absolutely hose this game plan, which is, you know, that's good to be aware of that weakness. I think aristocrats in general, reanimation would be effective against this deck. And also I think combo, I mean, we don't have any counter spells, so like combo can like totally wreck this deck as well, but combo wrecks every deck in Commander. I mean, that's like an unspoken like rule. That's why CEDH is so focused on combo. So that is the video, everybody. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this turbo brew, leave a like. It always helps me with the algorithm. And not only that, it also just sort of tells me what type of content you like to see. If I see a lot of likes, I know, hey, my viewers like to see this stuff, I'll make more of it. And also, if you like this sort of content, feel free to subscribe. That is completely free, and I am sort of trying to emphasize more MTG content. I know that I tend to do a variety of different games in my content. You know, TF2 is where I kind of got my start, and I feel like a lot of my subs actually still are subbed to me for TF2 content, but I'm trying to just branch out a little bit and really only upload what I find interesting and exciting, and right now, brewing Magic decks is that. In fact, I still have over 50 deck techs to get through with all of the decks I have in paper. I do plan to actually make this deck in paper, so I might examine it one more time for maybe 1 or 2 cuts, but I will throw the deck list down below. You can access it both on Tapped Out and Moxfield, depending on what you want to use. So that's the video, guys. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.